Welcome, everybody. This is Doug McCall. I'll be facilitating this session sponsored by the Global Network of Deans of Education, and I'll be handing over the introductions and the chairing of the session to Irma Eloff, who is the interim chair of the Global Network of Deans of Education. Irma?
Thank you very much, Doug. Welcome, everyone, at this informal side meeting of the Global Network of Deans of Education. There's a number of us joining online on the meeting in Toronto that's taking place at the moment. Thank you very much for Doug for facilitating the technological part of this meeting. And thank you very much to Dan Leitch, who's facilitating the discussion in Toronto itself. Okay, so we will have time for, I'm not sure if we should do the introductions now or whether we should jump right in with the presentations and then do the introductions during the roundtable discussions. Doug, do you have any preference perhaps?
Well, maybe just to introduce the network, and then the next slide just lists the speakers. So maybe we could start with that, and then go to as well as the idea of how the Deans of Education need to could be interacting more with various UN agencies.
Okay, sure. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this network was conceptualized in order to bring the voices of education deans to UN and global initiatives worldwide. It came from several discussions between various parties and individuals over a number of years, where we saw the need for deans of education to contribute and to comment and to perhaps make contributions to the development of the global initiatives that's currently taking place. So the purpose of today's discussion is on the one hand to kickstart this process in a little bit of more of a formal way, but then also to be we've invited some speakers who will be talking about global initiatives that is of relevance to Deans of Education. And we're very fortunate that we will have Dr. AERA Madupra, the Director of the UNESCO Teacher Education Task Force, who will be speaking to us in a few minutes. And then also Katie Goodwin will be talking from the Education Workforce Initiative of the Education Commission, chaired by Gordon Brown in the UN Education Envoy. And then Doug McCall himself will speak about OECD Education 2030. So quite a number of initiatives that are relevant to Deans at the moment, and we're looking forward to all the contributions that we will be getting. Okay, so I think to start off, since we're waiting for Katie, maybe we should invite Dr. Adupra to speak to us. And for those of you who don't know him, perhaps just a little bit of background. Dr. AERA Madupra is the Chief of the Section for Teacher Development and Head of Secretariat of the International Task Force on Teachers. He joined UNESCO in 2003. In 2009, he was reappointed to the headquarters as the Chief of Section for Teacher Policy and Development before the sector management requested him to take over the Secretariat of the International Task Force on Teachers for EFA in 2012. Prior to his career at UNESCO, Dr. Adupra spent over 16 years as a teacher and a high school principal in both rural and urban areas in his native Togo. He also conducted teacher training courses at the University of Benin. So welcome, Dr. Adupra, and thank you very much for speaking to us today.
Thank you, Dr. Eloff, and thank you, Doug, and all who have contributed to my participation in this session. It's a real pleasure for me to know that there is a network, a global network of Deans of Education. So it's an opportunity for me to share with you something that will speak to your ambition of working with global UN organizations in addressing the Sustainable Development Goal. So what I've prepared to do is to talk to you about the International Task Force on Teachers for Education 2030. Can I check if the communication is well, the connection is good?
Yes, the connection is good. I can hear you clearly, and Doug is handling the slides for us. It's now on the first slide.
Okay, so he can move to the next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Next slide, Doug.
Sorry, I'm doing two things at once. Here we go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so up front, I wanted to tell you that the International Task Force on Teachers is the implementation and monitoring arm for the Sustainable Development Goal 4.C on teachers. And as you all know, before the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in New York, there was the Incheon Declaration, where the education community met to try to adopt what education should be in the post-EFA era. And for the first time, they focused on what teachers should do, and then they committed to ensure that teachers and educators are empowered, adequately recruited, well trained, professionally qualified, motivated, and supported within well-resourced, efficient, and effectively governed system. It is quite loaded, but it is very comprehensive. Of when you think about teachers, you don't just think about teachers' salary, you don't just think about teachers' training, but you need to make sure that we talk about teachers and educators, because there are other workforce staff that contribute to education. And I'm glad that you are talking to the Education Commission, and we'll listen to Kidi also on that initiative. The recruitment was also important because I think lessons was learned from the EFA era, when the focus was on access, and many countries sped up to create schools everywhere, even under trees, and claim that there is access to 80% of the school-age children. But for the lack of teachers, anybody who could take care of younger children was given the task of teaching or holding the class. So that's created an awareness that when you talk about education, we mean quality education for all. But when when this Incheon Declaration reached New York, where the goals will be adopted, then the teacher target for the first time that made it to the SDGs as opposed to the MDGs goal, say that by 2030, substantially increase the supply of qualified teachers, including through international cooperation for teacher training, and in developing countries, especially least developed countries and small island developing states. So I highlighted again the dedicated target on teachers, and also the fact that they talk about qualified teachers, and they talk about teacher training because I'm addressing deans here. You are the ones who are responsible for training, and then we'll have a lot to learn from you. Next slide, please. I will give you a quick background to the International Task Force. It was created actually in 2008 in Oslo, because after the Education for All framework was adopted in the year 2000 in Dakar, there was an ambition saying by 2015, we want to have education for all. So every year after the Dakar Forum, there is a high-level group meeting that convened and then kind of review progress, and then they had a final declaration or recommendation, which nobody followed up on. But when Norway was to host this high-level group meeting in Oslo in 2008, they said that we know that we are halfway through the EFA era, and we know that almost a good number of countries will never meet the 2015 deadline. We also know some of the challenges that countries face, which is the reason why they cannot meet the target. So instead of having a declaration again out of the Oslo meeting, we would like to have a concrete initiative that could address a concrete challenge that the countries are facing. Several options were proposed, but there was a consensus on the fact that teachers constitute the biggest challenge that countries face to be able to provide the education to the high number of children coming to school, and then to have the right training and qualification to take care of. So they said that they will have an initiative on teachers. They decided that the initiative should be a flexible initiative, a partnership carried out by member states and organizations which are willing to contribute to bridging this global challenge of quantity of teachers and quality of teachers. So that's how the establishment of the Teacher Task Force came about, as a global alliance of partners working together, and it includes different constituencies that you have on the screen. The structure now, since it is a flexible partnership or network, it has no legal entity. It's not a legal entity. So UNESCO hosts the secretariat, and the structure includes two co-chairs from the beginning. They said that there will be two co-chairs, one from the north or the donor countries or organization, and one from the south representing the countries themselves. It will also have a steering committee, which will be representative of the various constituencies, and then it will have the members' assembly, which will have the decision-making power and own the structure. Next, please.
Membership.
Task force is also, yeah, yeah. So I will, this slide is just to give you an overview of representation in the membership. We have 85% of members which are countries and 48 members which are organizations. And here on organizations, we have UN agencies, we have non-UN intergovernmental organizations like the Commonwealth, the Francophone Organization, and well, the Arab Bureau of Education, for example. We also have ILO, UN agency, and we have non-governmental organizations, international non-governmental organizations. Next slide, please. I also show the distribution by region, and we see that by large, Africa is the highest represented continent. The task force, as I said, aim to address three major gaps when you talk about teachers and teaching. The first gap is about policy. It was observed from the beginning that countries may say, we want to recruit teachers. We want many more teachers. But these teachers need to be trained. These teachers need to be deployed equitably in the countries so that qualified teachers or trained teachers are not only in the big cities and rural or disadvantaged areas have their children taught by unqualified teachers. So there is a need for a policy, a comprehensive policy framework where the government could think comprehensively about what it takes to have a sustainable stock of well-trained and qualified teachers. The second gap is capacity. The countries need to have the capacity to devise or develop these policies, implement them, evaluate them and they monitor them successfully, and readjust because things change. Demographic changes happen, economic changes happen, environmental changes happen. So the country should be able not only to have a policy and say we have the policy, but be able to implement, monitor, and revise accordingly. There is also a capacity gap when we talk about the institutions that train teachers. Are they using curricula of the 19th century for children that are expected to work in the 21st century? So there is a need for the teacher training institutions to also be capacitated to develop their training program, develop the training for the educators, and to have also way of attracting the best to their institution for training to become teachers. So that capacity is not spread out. The third gap is the financing gap. It was observed that in many countries, the education budget may be over 80%, but 80% of that budget could be spent on teachers' salary only. So what it takes to have these teachers is not just to be paying their salaries, which they find insufficient, but it's also for them to have living and working conditions, to have adequate resources for supporting their teaching and supporting learners to learn. So there is an evident financing gap that needs to be also filled. Next, please. Yeah, I will skip this one because it talks about the various dimensions of teacher issues that was discussed during the phases throughout the task force existence. Next, please. Well, I will dwell a little bit on the current strategic plan of the task force, which started being implemented last year and which is in its second year. The objective, as I said, is to ensure inclusive quality education for all and promote lifelong learning, as stated by SDG 4 on education. The vision is to make sure that teaching is a valued profession and every learner is taught by qualified, motivated, empowered teachers. Again, the same wording that we saw earlier. And the mission of the task force is to mobilize government and other stakeholders for the advancement of teachers and the teaching and teaching. The task force will also be acting as catalyst for global, regional, and national efforts through advocacy, knowledge creation and sharing, and country support. Next, please. Okay, this slide is the summary of the whole strategic plan. You see the goal, which is to improve teacher quantity and also enhance and improve teacher quality. And this is translated into three main lines of action. The first one is advocacy and coordination. Advocacy because decision makers need to know why it is important to put resources on teacher development. And it's not through going around and telling people teachers are important, support them. No, it's also to do research or collect evidence on successful example that when you put resource on teachers, here is the result. So it's not just advocacy for the sake of advocacy, saying teachers are nice people, support them. The second main line of action is knowledge creation and sharing. So we offer the opportunity of the task force is to gather information from research, from country case studies, to show what is happening globally around teachers and teaching. And to strengthen also the monitoring and implementation of the SDG 4.C, the teacher target, and offer exchange knowledge on the teaching profession. The third one is mobilizing or facilitating support to countries. I said earlier that the task force include organizations and countries. Why would a country want to be in a network like that? It is to learn from others, but also when the country want to develop the policy or strengthen teacher training or do that, other people in the network provide financial resource or technical expertise for providing backstopping to the country. Next. Hi, Doug. Next slide, please. Okay. And along these three main line of action that I have just described, for 2018 to 2021, we have three flagship initiatives. The first one is the Policy Dialogue Forum, the annual Policy Dialogue Forum that we organize. I will tell you more about that later. And it has become the most popular and event of the task force. It gathers every year members, experts, and who are policymakers or teacher researchers or teacher trainers and teachers themselves. We gather 300 to 400 participants in a place. And this year, I will talk to you later about this year forum. The second flagship program is the knowledge platform, a development of knowledge platform. The task force aims to be the one-stop shop for global information sharing on teachers and teaching. So we are tasked to develop this knowledge platform. Maybe some of you have the expertise to submit proposal for being, when the call of proposal will be out, to develop that knowledge platform for knowledge sharing among participants, but also to support the stocking of information, expert profiles that countries could access easily, or international organizations can also tap into to implement their activities globally. The third flagship initiative is the development, the use of a teacher policy development guide that countries ask the task force to develop. The guide has been produced and translated into 7 languages. And right now we are working with Open University of UK to put the guide into a modular version that countries, ministries of education, teacher training institution can use to train people to understand what a comprehensive teacher policy means and how to develop it and how to implement it. Next, please. How do we work? The new strategic plan has also put the emphasis on regional groups. The regional groups are expected to be a network of task force members at regional level. They will coordinate regional work on teachers and teaching, identify initiatives that they could implement, and also try to follow up on annual meetings and policy dialogue forum recommendation or outcomes at regional level. They will serve as a bridge between the task force secretariat and the other regions and what happened at regional. Regional groups are also part of resource mobilization efforts by identifying potential donors and expertise in their region that could contribute to the work of the task force. We have the 5 regions, Africa, Arab states, Asia Pacific, Europe and North America, Latin America and the Caribbean. Let me pause here and say that you, as a global network of deans of college of education, you may want to consider how your regional networks could support the work in the different regions. I know that Dr. Elof is already doing that in Africa, so it can be a lever for the task force action in the regions. Next, please. Okay. Besides the regional group, for this current phase of the strategic plan, we also have 4 thematic groups. This thematic group, the first one to be put in place was the one on teacher management in crisis and emergency situation. Actually, they came out, a number of countries, 5 years ago, and they said, every year we meet and you talk about teacher issues as if we were all from the same standpoint. We are countries who have either come out of a protracted conflict or suffered from a natural disaster and so on. Can't you develop a specific initiative to support our specific context cases? So there is one on teacher management in crisis and emergencies, the one in yellow. There is one on inclusion and equity in teacher policies and practices. And there is one on information and communication technology and distance education for teacher development. Today we are talking about artificial intelligence. How can it be applied to teacher development and contribute or support leapfrog in countries where the quantity of shortage is so huge that man-made training or recruitment cannot cover the gap. And the last one is early childhood care and education teachers and facilitators. You know, in most of the countries, when you ask about teacher, you talk about teachers, the ministers and the authorities, even people, jump to talk about primary teachers and secondary teachers. But we all know that it's at the foundation stage that the games are set. So if the task force want to be the one-stop shop, the global organization to address teacher issues in all its dimensions, in all sub-levels of education, and it also overlook pre-primary teachers and facilitators, then who else could take care of that? So this working group is also active in supporting the work of the task force. Next, and I'll conclude shortly. So we talk about each member of the task force is represented by 3 focal points. The focal points have specific roles. They contribute to mobilize national or organizational stakeholders to share institution information and not an individual. So there are 3 focal points per agency or a country. They also serve as a liaison between the secretariat and the task force. They also share information with their management or hierarchy, and they contribute to the resource mobilization effort of the task force. Next, please. So it looks like I have given you this overview of what the task force is, what its strategic objective aims to do until 2021. But I'd like to give you highlights of the key activities for 2019. On advocacy, it's not the only activity, but I'm just making the main one. We all celebrate World Teachers' Day on the 5th of October. This year, 5th of October is a Saturday, but we'll observe the event on the 7th of December, which is Monday. And the theme will be Young Teachers, the Future of the Profession. This theme is chosen not from the point of view of age only. Young teachers, we need to attract new people, of course, to train to become teachers. But here we are also talking about novice teachers who face the classroom or the school context for the first time. How do we prepare them? How do we empower them? How do we support them to take leadership role and serve the communities they are working in? So World Teachers Day this year will be on this theme. I invite you to organize events in your various locations on that. Once we finish the concept note and how we conceptualize the event, we will disseminate it through our network. The second main line of action is knowledge creation and sharing. And there are 3 big event activities. Right now, we are preparing to undertake a study to have a publication next year on teacher motivation. We are deploring the fact that the profession is no more valued. How do we attract teachers to the profession? What do countries do to motivate their teachers? How do teachers themselves view their profession and want to be motivated? We talk about incentive, but it's not monetary incentives only. What does the research say about motivation and teacher motivation? We are looking for expertise to support this study. The second one is the development of an international guiding framework for teaching standards. That one we are doing with Education International and ILO. And we want the framework to be as broad as possible so that countries can contextualize and prepare their own teaching standards. And the 12th International Policy Dialogue Forum, which I talk about, will be held in Dubai in December from 8 to 12 or 7 to 12 December. And I invite, because of the theme will also be around the future of teaching. And with the Ministry of Education of the host country, we have already decided to have at least 3 or 4 panels, round tables. There will be one round table on for the deans of colleges of education. And this is why I'm so excited to talk to you and see that, Irma already knows as ADEF, a member of TTF, that we make room for deans to talk, but there will be a dedicated roundtable for deans to tell us how they recruit, how they prepare, and how do they see the future of the profession. So your various expertise will be needed. The last main line of action is facilitating support to countries. We are mobilizing experts who know issues about teacher policy development to use our guide, and we have right now 23 countries which submitted requests for support. So we look of experts who sometimes volunteer, sometimes we support them. We issue them contracts for them to go and then assist national teams who will develop their own policies, and then they will serve just as guides for them. I mentioned already that we are publishing the online interactive version of the teacher policy guide. So those are the key highlights, the highlight for 2019. I will be happy to answer questions that you might have, and thank you for this opportunity to share the work of the task force with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adubra, for that very illuminating presentation. I'm sure that we will be referring back to many of the points that you've made in the presentation as we discuss the work of the Global Network of Deans of Education. And thank you very much for your kind invitation to attend the International Policy Dialogue Forum in Dubai. As a previous attendee, I can really vouch for the vibrant, dynamic nature of that policy dialogue forum. It's an excellent forum. So thank you. I see that Katie has joined us on the call. Is that correct, Katie? Can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be reserving the discussion and questions for all 3 of our speakers towards the end of the discussion. So, Katie, you're welcome to jump in. We did the introductions a little bit earlier, but for those of you who have recently joined us, Katie is working on the Education Workforce Initiative of the Education Commission chaired by Gordon Brown. Over to you, Katie.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for my technical difficulties. It's great to finally be here with you virtually. A big thank you to Doug for inviting EWI to engage with the Global Network of Deans of Education, and apologies to the other presenters. I just caught the end, Adem, of your presentation. So my name is Katie Godwin, and I work with the Education Commission, helping to lead the Education Workforce Initiative. If you'll move to the next slide, the Education Workforce Initiative, for those of you who aren't familiar with this work, was established in 2017 in response to a recommendation coming out of the Commission's Learning Generation report to set up an international group to explore education workforce design and strengthening. This initiative aims to harness the latest evidence and explore innovations to inform new ways of approaching, designing and implementing education workforce reforms and policies. So the initiative is undertaking this work through 2 key deliverables. The first is an education workforce report, which will outline key considerations for rethinking education workforce design and strengthening. And the second is collaboration with 3 countries. Those are Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Vietnam, to support them in developing policy options for addressing their specific workforce challenges. If you'll move to the next slide. The first of these deliverables is the Education Workforce Report, and the the report aims to really bring the latest evidence and experience, explore new approaches, draw on lessons from other sectors to help catalyze new thinking on education workforce design and implementation. This work is future focused. We're trying to imagine what an education relevant for children and young people requires today, while simultaneously orienting towards future needs. The report recognizes many interrelated dimensions of the education workforce, but it is focusing on design and strengthening in order to drive access and learning and equity and inclusion, the goals that are critical for achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goal 4. So the scope of this report is on primary and secondary education in lower and middle income countries, but we recognize that many of the considerations that we put forward are applicable to countries from all contexts, as all countries are facing challenges with their workforce. And we are writing the report first and foremost with policymakers in mind, but we hope to ensure that it's relevant and accessible for a diverse set of audiences. We've also thought a lot about inclusion and equity, and this report really tries to treat these as contextually dependent and move beyond considerations of simply including disadvantaged or marginalized groups or issues, whether that's based on gender, disability, language, ethnicity, etc., to understand inclusion and equity as an integral principle in education design and strengthening. If you'll move to the next slide, please. The report is divided into two parts. The first part kind of sets up the issues we're trying to address and provides a rationale for why we need to rethink the education workforce. It outlines our framing and gives a bit of context around the approaches used in the second part, which explores how you can actually start to reimagine the education workforce in design and strengthening. And that's throughout the life cycle, so from attraction to recruitment, training, deployment, professional development. And it then moves on to considerations around implementation, specifically around political economy and financing. So the next slide, I'll just take you through pretty quickly kind of our high-level overview for the first part. The report takes as its starting point the progress made globally toward the UN Sustainable Development Goal 4. Yeah, you can move to the next slide. To provide inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So we know that over the past 10 to 15 years, significant gains have been made, especially in access, with the number of out-of-school children and youth cut almost in half. But despite these gains, we know that progress has been quite slow, and we're not on track to reach SDG 4 by 2030. And this is in access, but also critically in learning and equity and inclusion as well. So the report takes this twin set of goals, access and learning and equity inclusion, as the education system goals toward which an education workforce should be oriented. So kind of alongside this slow rate of progress towards these goals, we know that education systems are embedded in societies that are changing at a faster pace than ever before, and many are struggling to keep up. If you'll move to the next slide. So these changes are being driven by a set of key global trends, and they have specific implications for education. We know that demographic and environmental changes are reshaping, the configurations of countries and communities, and this means education systems are now responsible for providing a quality education to an increasingly diverse student population with a wider range of needs. It's becoming more critical for systems then to reach those in the hardest to reach locations, as well as overcrowded urban areas, to ensure that inequality isn't exacerbated. We know that unprecedented growth and innovation in technology are raising fundamental questions about what it means to live and work in this century, and we're finding that these changes require kind of a broader range of skills for people to be able to succeed. And these shifts present kind of a critical opportunity for education to evolve, to meet those skills, but also to influence the future direction of skills as well. Finally, there are some key trends in education itself. We know there are advances in the brain sciences that are giving us a better understanding of how children learn best. There's a move toward more personalized learning, wider networking, deeper collaboration taking place, all of which are changing kind of our understanding of what learning can look like, with implications for how we deliver education. So we know that education has to respond to these new requirements and pressures, and it will determine whether these trends, whether they be demographic, environmental, or technological, will create opportunity or entrench inequality. If you'll move to the next slide. So in light of these pressures on education systems, we know we have to leverage one of the most critical elements responsible for student outcomes and development, and that is the education workforce. And this means teachers, of course, but also the wider education workforce, such as school and district leaders and support staff. But before we can start to rethink how the education workforce can best respond and adapt to the challenges, we really need to understand what specific challenges they are facing themselves currently. So in the report, we've listed many of the key challenges that the education workforce often face, and I won't go over all of these today, but I do want to highlight a few. The first is that this report recognizes that teacher shortages are context specific. We've all seen the projections kind of on the unimaginable number of teachers globally that will be needed over the next years, but we know that there is more to the shortage than this. In some contexts, there are enough qualified teachers, but in most contexts, whether there are enough or not, they often aren't in the right places, or there aren't enough in the right subjects, and this is often kind of compounded by deployment and distribution issues, which reinforce inequality. In addition to shortages, we know that there's this wider challenge that in most systems, there isn't a design for the workforce to provide quality and inclusive education. And this includes recognizing inclusion gaps in the composition of the workforce itself. Evidence shows that education outcomes improve when a student feels they're reflected and represented by their teacher. So it's problematic if systems aren't paying attention to the composition of their workforce to ensure that they represent the students they serve. We also want to emphasize that teachers are increasingly expected to fulfill more complex roles on top of other duties that they have, including, administrative, and often this is with limited support and in challenging contexts. We know that most systems that do support teachers tend to focus on developing individual skills rather than kind of growing the collective capacity of the entire education workforce required. And then finally, we know there are issues with teacher professionalization and motivation, and we think that this is compounded by the issue that the expertise of the education workforce is rarely used to inform and design workforce reform. So the next slide, these challenges and obstacles have provided an opportunity for us to kind of question long-held assumptions about the education workforce, including delivery and the one teacher, one classroom model, but also it's allowing for us to kind of explore the changing role of the teacher and other critical education professionals' roles as well. So as mentioned, we know that teachers' instructional roles are becoming increasingly complex, and that's on top of non-teaching responsibilities they have, often with limited support or even ownership of their professional practice. But we know that usually teachers aren't working alone. There are a broad range of actors in education that support quality learning, and understanding how these roles can be utilized can help to rethink and more clearly define the changing role of teachers so they can focus their expertise on critical areas of need, and also help us start to understand how the education workforce can function as teams of professionals as opposed to planning for a workforce that's just teachers kind of siloed in classrooms. So we know that many systems in developing contexts rarely account for other roles in planning and designing the workforce, and many still rely primarily on traditional models of delivery, even if these have proven really difficult to sustain. So we do think it's key to challenge some of these assumptions around the education workforce. And the next slide, part 2 of the report, begins to explore how we can actually start to look at the workforce more holistically and possibly moving beyond the one teacher, one classroom model. And it's starting with the design. So if you'll move to the next slide. We've started looking at existing evidence around workforce design, and we found little evidence around large-scale holistic workforce design in any context, really. But we did find evidence that suggests we should, start to rethink workforce composition and configuration, and some evidence of the directions this could take. So the evidence we've reviewed, which included existing evidence and some primary research we undertook, as well as case studies, suggests that there is a greater emphasis now on student agency and personalized learning, which means that the role of the teacher is evolving. This doesn't mean the social aspects of learning are de-emphasized, only that a wider range of pedagogical approaches might be needed to ensure that all students are learning and developing. Evidence is also suggesting that different types of professional roles at the classroom and school level can support improved learning, and this includes roles such as school leaders. And we're learning that school leaders are most effective when they can provide instructional leadership to teachers and create kind of this culture of shared responsibility for learning. Evidence from the health sector that we've looked at has shown that multidisciplinary teams of professionals that include kind of an optimal mix of differentiated but complementary skills allows for flexibility in addressing context-specific challenges and kind of maximizes expertise. And we're looking, of course, that most education workforces don't work this way. And although we need more evidence, there is some to suggest that technology has the potential to support teaching and learning activities and make other functions such as administration and management more efficient. And then finally, the research has shown that an effective district level can provide really strategic and instructional leadership for schools and facilitate peer collaboration between schools and amongst clusters, and support teachers based on the data that they collect. So in addition to this scan of existing evidence, we had a team of researchers that undertook a small qualitative study in two of the countries we're working with, Ghana and Vietnam, to understand what those workforces look like and currently do. And they surveyed primary and secondary schools in both urban and rural areas. And they also held workshops with stakeholders from all levels in the system to kind of understand how they envision the future education workforce to look like. I don't have time to share those findings today, but they will, of course, be included as part of the report. So the primary research in Ghana and Vietnam, along with the review of existing evidence and case studies that we undertook, informed the development of 7 kind of key principles to guide education workforce design. If you'll move to the next slide. So the principles begin with the students ensuring they are the starting point for considering and determining which members of the education workforce need to be present and when and in what ways. They include moving from one teacher, one classroom model of education delivery to a more team-based model in which teachers are able to focus on the learning needs of students and are supported by other professionals, both in and outside the school. The principles emphasize recognizing the diversity of both students and the education workforce and ensuring that issues of equity and inclusion, as well as contextual and cultural relevance are considered. And if we shift to this kind of team-based approach, another principle then is to define the workforce by the capabilities of the team and not just individuals, and consider how these capabilities align with the changing needs of learners. And this includes acknowledging kind of the skills and knowledge that the education workforce already possesses and providing opportunities to cultivate those skills and develop new skills that contribute positively to teaching and learning. And then finally, in designing the workforce, you'd want to cultivate, in a team-based kind of approach, a culture of trust and shared responsibility that allows for creativity and flexibility, as well as autonomy and decision making, and encourages reflexive practices through evidence, innovation, reflection, and adaptation. So from these design considerations, our research team are in the process of trying to develop a few example models of what this could look like in the near and then the far future as well, and what types of roles we might see in future versions of education workforces. So the next slide From these design considerations, we kind of move to how to strengthen the existing workforce. And in strengthening the education workforce, we know there are many key issues to address. Two of the key findings that are emerging from this chapter are that the workforce strengthening must include moving toward professionalization for all roles within the workforce, so meaning clear role descriptions, training, and career paths, especially for leadership roles. And the second is that new routes into teaching are needed if we're going to address some of the serious teacher shortages and ensure that the workforce itself is inclusive, meaning that the composition of the workforce is diverse and draws on individuals from different backgrounds with diverse strengths. So on the slide, you'll see two examples that we plan to include in the report of programs aimed to bring in underrepresented groups into teaching. The GATE program in Sierra Leone targets rural young women, and the Mano y Pensamiento program in Colombia provides training for student teachers who are deaf. We've included a few other programs in the report as well, but towards the end of the presentation, it would be great to hear from you if there are other innovative pre-service programs that aim to bring in underrepresented groups into teaching or other roles that you know about. The next slide, the final two chapters of the report are focused on implementation considerations, specifically political economy and financing of education workforce reform. I'll briefly touch on just a few of the key findings coming out of these chapters. We know political economy can significantly impact the uptake and sustainability of reforms. And so one of the key takeaways from this chapter is that the education workforce itself is a crucial driver for systematic change over the long term in order to see results. And this means systems should not only focus on improving quality, but on creating suitable mechanisms and policies that support and encourage new and existing members of the workforce to be active agents in change at all levels of the system. And then finally, we know that human resources are by far the greatest investment of education systems, and that attracting, supporting, retaining, and motivating the right people is crucial. Remuneration policies alongside other benefits and conditions of work for education personnel are key concerns for policymakers. We know the most common way of organizing teacher career progressions across the world is through a single schedule salary structure. However, there are several issues with the single track model, especially when it comes to attracting and motivating the best people. So some of the considerations coming out of this chapter are, firstly, that to be attractive in financial terms, the systems should aim to provide salaries that are competitive with those of equivalent professions. That to retain teachers, salary scales should not be flat, that they should be quite dynamic over years of service. And then third, that financial rewards, while they are the most significant education workforce costs, are not the only ways of rewarding teachers and other education personnel. And that to motivate staff and ensure professionalism, the system should include recognition, responsibility, growth opportunities, both financial and non-financial. Okay, so that's a quick overview of some of our key messages coming out of the report. We're hoping that these will also inform the work we're doing with countries. So if you'll move to the next slide and then the next one. So I'll give you just a brief overview of our work so far with our 3 countries. In Ghana, we're working with our in-country partner PwC to support the Ministry of Education and Ghana Education Service to develop an education workforce design for national district and school levels to support their new education reforms being implemented. In Sierra Leone, we're working with the Teaching Service Commission through FAB Inc. and PEAS, who are partners who are trying to help the TSC to rapidly develop options for pathways for teacher professionalization, especially for teachers who are unqualified or underqualified. And potentially supporting the development of additional roles to ensure that all children can achieve foundational learning. Finally, in Vietnam, we're partnering with Arizona State University who are working with the Ministry of Education and Training to think about the education workforce required for STEM education. And we're prototyping and piloting an adaptive learning platform for grade 7 math teachers and students. Okay, so final slide. I know that was a lot of information, and I'm sure you have questions. We also have a few questions we'd like to pose to you, as we know you all have a wealth of knowledge on many of the issues we're covering. So we would like to know if there are any institutional programs providing pre-service education for roles beyond teachers that you're aware of, especially in lower middle income countries. If there are any innovative or alternative pre-service programs that bring in underrepresented groups into teaching or other roles. And if there are any compelling ways you know of in which technology is being used to enhance pre-service education currently, and especially in lower middle income countries. I think that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions, Katie, and for the very enlightening presentation on the work of the Education Workforce Initiative. Thank you very much for that. Now over to our next presenter in this session, Doug. I think you will be presenting on the OECD Education 2030 report.
Irma, I think it would be better to maybe take time for the questions for our two presentations.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yes,
Sure. Okay.
Because I know it is Friday evening for both of our presenters, and
okay.
I know Katie in particular has been kind enough to give up her Friday evening just before going away on vacation. So if we could.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah. So if we could
right,
maybe open it up for questions.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so it's open for discussion. Any one of the participants who are in Toronto themselves on Dan's side, or any one of our online participants, if you wish to pose questions or comments to either Adam or Katie, you're welcome to do so.
So I'll see if there's any questions or comments from folks here.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe while Dan is doing that, I could add maybe a bit of a comment, but also I think it's indicative. I was really pleased to hear the work from EDM in terms of how one of the themes they've chosen is preparing teachers for education in emergency contexts, and I know that's a context that's very urgent and must be addressed and has a unique set of needs. And I know from previous conversations with Katie that the EWI has been working with a strong concern for low resource countries, which are slightly different and have more ongoing challenges. And so I think that's really good that the two agencies we're hearing from now are contextualizing their work. And I think from the education faculty point of view, we probably need to think about how we can understand better the capacities of the education faculties or teacher preparation processes in both of those kinds of contexts to be able to have a realistic assessment of how the deans of education and education faculties can make a contribution. So I'm really pleased to hear about that contextualization theme that's emerged already.
Okay,
Yes.
so we have one.
All right.
I know we have at least one question here. I'll ask the speakers to identify themselves as well so that we can build bridges between the participants and folks who are here in this room.
Thank you, Dan. Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Hello. Hi. I'm Prachi Srivastava. I'm with the University of Western Ontario. Thank you for highlighting the task force as well as all of the work that the Commission is doing. I had a question specifically about context in these countries. In particular, as we know, the context for some of the countries in the Global South for developing their teacher workforce in particular is very contested in terms of the role of the private sector, and in particular in countries where public-private partnerships are coming in to either oversee the management or the delivery of schooling within the context of also trying to strengthen public sector provision. So I'm thinking specifically about, for example, the Liberia PIL, which I've heard there might be, there are rumors, I don't know how true that is, that it might be extended to Ghana and potentially to Sierra Leone. And I was just wondering, in the context of the report that the Commission is preparing, whether or not there is actual discussion in terms of how we strengthen public sector provision and the workforce of the public sector, of public sector teachers and leaders in the context of what are very real changes in delivery of basic and secondary schooling.
Adam or Katie? Oh, I think this one was addressed to Katie.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hi, I'm sorry. I don't think I caught all of your question, but I think the gist of it is, how are we addressing strengthening public sector provision in terms of the changes that are ongoing with public-private sector partnerships and provision of basic and secondary? Was that the gist of your question? Sorry. Yes?
Yes, I think you can continue with that.
Okay, so the report is exclusively focused on strengthening public sector provision. We, of course, have looked at various public-private partnerships in delivery within lower middle income countries as well, and we are still figuring out how to position this within the report. But the thrust of our messaging is around strengthening public sector provision and understanding how governments, whether centralized or decentralized, can best plan given the provision changes as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there more questions coming from Toronto, Dan?
I don't see anybody jumping up right now, but there may be some others that come up. I'll keep my eye out.
Okay, I have a question for Katie from my side, if it's okay. I very much like the idea of mapping the kind of initiatives and the examples and making it part of the report. I think that's an excellent idea in terms of building knowledge bridges, because there can often be resonance in similar contexts. My question is, what do you think are the greatest challenges because this is a huge shift in thinking about the education workforce in general, and what do you think are the greatest challenges that you are facing with this, and more importantly perhaps, how do you think deans of education can contribute in addressing those challenges?
So, sorry, Irma, what was the first part of your question? I heard the deans of education role in affecting the challenges.
The first part is I really like the idea of mapping examples of initiatives.
Okay.
I think if that can be, and you've asked for examples, I think that will be excellent. The second part is, what do you think the challenges are in terms of changing the thinking around the education workforce, and how can deans of education assist in that?
Sure. I think one of the key challenges that we've had in our discussions with the countries we're working with specifically are around thinking of the workforce really as a team-based model.
Yeah.
As opposed to just focusing exclusively planning and designing workforces on teachers. And it's really difficult, of course, because the data that is available, at least in the countries we're working with, is quite limited, especially on support roles and roles actually beyond teaching and learning instructional roles.
Yeah.
So I think really, and of course we've drawn a lot from evidence from the health sector, and we always tend to get a lot of pushback on comparisons with the health sector. And I think rightly so. We aren't advocating that we try to, I guess, adapt any kind of model from the health sector. We realize there are real differences between education and health, but we do think it's important to learn from other public service delivery work, and we do think that the requirements on teachers is extraordinary, and trying to kind of break open the thinking that teachers have to do everything individually and cover every role that we're increasingly wanting, for our students, is really just unrealistic and untenable. So I think one of the greatest challenges thinking is just trying to understand where different skills and strengths already exist in education workforces and making those visible and able to getting the data so we can be able to plan for those. As far as where deans of education can play a role, I think it'll be really critical if we are to take this thinking to the next step, to then understand the implications for training for these different roles, obviously, and recruiting and training actually for these different roles, and understanding what that would look like, as far as kind of mapping out different skill sets and competencies and how those interact between different roles.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments for Katie specifically from anyone?
I'll jump in and ask one. I've seen many of these types of reports come out, and a lot of policy goals be set. And there always seems to be this tension between how do we do everything now, and then the year comes and we move on. To what extent will this initiative consider long capacity building, long-term institutional change, and long-term goals, as opposed to these kind of immediate big shifts that doomed in many cases to repeat themselves?
Your question is addressed to is it addressed to Katie?
It could be to anybody who wants to deal with it, but I think it's specifically thinking about the Education Workforce Initiative and long-term sustainable capacity to development, as opposed to short-term policy change or program development. So how do you really think about long-term capacity building so that you have sustained change and sustained support and sustained improvement versus kind of short-term policy and program implementation?
Okay, thank you. Katie?
Sure. I'm sorry, there's really a lot of background noise, so I'm not sure I'm getting all of the questions, but the question is on sustained change and development, so how this initiative will move beyond the report kind of considerations. Okay.
Long term.
So the report is really, we aren't making any really concrete recommendations. This is a lot of new thinking, and we are just providing suggestions aimed at policymakers. But in the countries that we're working with, specifically Ghana, that is undergoing massive education reforms right now. We really are hoping that this these considerations will inform the completely new design that they are undertaking of their education workforce, so that we can start to understand what this would look like in practice and the process that a country needs to take, and the conversations that need to be had to really move this from these really high level kind of considerations to practically planning for these type of workforces. So I would say that's one way we're looking to move this kind of into the action and more sustainable phase of this work.
Okay, thank you.
If I
More
may,
questions?
Irma.
Yeah. Yes, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, the first thing I would like to say is about the work of the Education Workforce Initiative. What is vital is that they work with the national authorities, and then it's one way of grounding the insight being generated into the thinking that goes about the reforms. And that's very important. And since we have also programs in Ghana, we witness this political ownership and of the processes. So it cannot be through a project or a program or an initiative like this that the final outcome and then the continuous implementation could be assessed. But the evidence that we are gathering is, or we are observing, is the empowerment of the decision makers in understanding the need to have this broad approach of the education workforce, and how a collaboration about the different teams. Teamwork should prevail instead of developing single competencies of individual teachers. The second thing I wanted to comment on is about the issue of the private sector intervening in education. This is a critical issue, but we know that the demand and the needs in these countries are so huge that government alone cannot address the gaps. So when we talk about public-private partnership, we still believe that it's the responsibility of the government to be in the driver's seat. I mentioned in one of the initiatives we are doing for this year, an international framework of teaching standards. And it's the government to set the standards and then to have a mechanism within which private sector organizations can come and contribute, because they also have social responsibility where they use the outcome or the benefit from the outcome of education. So supporting the government should not turn out to be dictating the rule or creating inequalities in the offer of education, whereby those who have the opportunity to go to private schools have better conditions, or vice versa. And all children have the right to access quality education. And all teachers, all children need to be taught by teachers who are well trained and professionally recognized. That's the link I could make between the role of the government, the public sector, and then the private sector contribution, which is needed and also, but need to be controlled and guided by government provisions. The last one is about Doug's comments about the work in a crisis context. If Doug or other people are interested, when I talk about the working group on teacher management in crisis, it's not a task force alone things, or the task force members, including the interagency network that works in the context, INE. And they are having a specific roundtable in November on teaching in crisis context. If other participants are interested, we can also share the information, and if some of you are working on those contexts or would like better understanding, we could involve them. And that thematic will also be part of one roundtable at the International Policy Dialogue Forum in Dubai in December.
Thank you very much, Edem, for that contribution. I think it's very valuable. It seems like there's a question coming up somewhere.
Irma, it's Doug here again. Just to respond quickly to Edom, I'm glad you made contact with the INEE, the International Network for Education in Emergencies, because that is a really good mechanism. They have over 50 organizations. Another that might be involved is one that I'm involved in. It's a fresh group. It has many of the UN agencies and Education International, many others, and their focus tends to be more on low resource countries. So maybe there's a similar process where that could be that connection could be made for that particular context, and would be happy to help facilitate that.
Please.
I did have a question and a comment about the slide on the screen. I know that in many countries, like Canada, that's where I live and work most of my life, is that there have been some really successful programs, much like the one that was highlighted in one of Katie's slides about bringing underrepresented groups into the teaching profession. And it's through the training of Indigenous prospective teachers. And so there's a lot of university programs through the education faculties in Canada that have successfully done that. And I would imagine that experience is similar to the one that Katie highlighted. And so maybe there is a way for the Global Network for Deans of Education to try to collect those kinds of examples. I may just slip in a little bit of a note that the Global Network is having a really tremendous response to its invitation to participate in the network. We've sent out we're estimating that there's over 5,000 institutions that could be invited, and the first 300, we've had over 100 people saying, yes, we'd like to participate. So 100 institutions. So it's really been a very positive response, and I think the Global Network and other networks too, not only the Global Network for Deans of Education, but there are many others within education faculties that can be brought to bear on this. And so we'd be happy to try to facilitate that answering of these questions and some of the gaps that Edom has announced as well.
Thank you very much for that, Doug. All right, colleagues, we're coming up to 2 o'clock in Toronto, which will take us into the roundtable discussion of the goals and the activities of the GMDE. So perhaps just some final comments from our two speakers before we will give Doug the opportunity to do his presentation.
Yeah, if I may, I have a question about the network, your network. How is it structured? Is it in the making? Do you have a structure that we can connect with? That's the first one.
Okay. Well, we are developing. We do have an interim steering committee, the names of whom I can easily communicate to you, Edom. We're in the process of setting this up. We've had some steering committee meetings, and this meeting in Toronto now with all of us electronically online as well is actually the first time that we are meeting. So it's a little bit of a of a historical moment for all of us. At the moment, our main goal is to bring the voices of education deans to the global initiatives, like I said in the beginning. And the structures are developing as we are having these conversations. So it's an exciting space to be in at the moment.
All right, thank you.
If I could add, we've been, well, the network, not we, because I'm not directly involved, but there are a number of national associations of deans of education have agreed to work on this, including those from the United States, from Canada, from from Scotland, from England, from
Australia.
Australia, and so on. So we're really pleased that, because that's probably the best mechanism to reach out to over 5,000 institutions, is to work with an existing regional and national associations, and so that's the strategy I think that's been successful thus far, and I think is one that I think will be pursued in the future.
Yes, the regional representativity of the network is critical to us, and we also have had some interest from mainland Europe, South America, and today we had someone from Kathmandu connecting with us. So there's in general there's interest from all over. All right, so I want to give Katie, are you still with us?
Hi, yes, I do have to go really quickly though.
Yes.
I had a similar question just on how to continue to engage with the network. I assume Doug will continue to liaise with you as you're on our advisory group, but it would be great to get any feedback or responses to our work, because I'm sure there is a wealth of knowledge among the network, so it would be great to keep connected and receive any feedback on our work to date.
Okay, likewise. Thank you very much for the questions that you've put to us. We will be engaging with that so that we can be of service.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy your holiday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. Enjoy your
All right.
holiday.
Thanks for joining. Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Thank you
Enjoy
very
your
much to
evening.
the both of you for joining us. All right. Now, Doug, I'm a little bit. I feel sorry that we don't have enough. Well, at time in this session for you to have a full half-hour discussion. Would you like us to proceed to the roundtable discussions, or would you like to give us an overview of the OECD work?
No, let's go to a roundtable discussion, and we can come back to an OECD overview at another time. It was going to be just a summary of maybe one thought, and it's indicative, I think, of how a global network or several global networks of deans of education can be helpful and can articulate the kinds of output that our two speakers have asked for, and that's in this. It's just showing. Where is it? Here we are. All those little boxes around that circle representing a whole school approach and the UN development goals, all of those boxes, and there's many more that could be added, are global initiatives that are seeking to involve schools and seeking to involve teachers in either general or specific things. And the voice of deans of education needs to be better heard by those different initiatives. And so I'm hopeful that the global network can serve that function in the future. And so I'll be happy to facilitate it a bit, but I'm also be happier when the global network can be taking more charge of its destiny and moving forward. The little website, the American Association of Colleges of Teachers of Education, has been willing to take that over, and there are a couple of members of the steering committee who have already volunteered to take on different tasks and different leadership roles. So it's really pleasing to see, and those, just the scale and the complexity of that diagram. I'm sorry for the small text, but it's just shows how much is going on. I as an individual have been just overwhelmed by the amount of things that are going on at the global level that need to have better educator input for sure. And maybe we can then go to a discussion. Although I'm wondering, Irma and Dan, do we want to take the discussion of the roles of the network to another time, or do we want to continue on it today?
I think we should continue on it today while we have everyone in the actual room and in the virtual room, I would say.
Okay.
Hi, Doug. This is Adam. If I may, I also would need to go, but I have a request. if we could have the list of the participants in this roundtable, it will help us with their contact details. So if we are doing work in their countries or in their regions, we could refer to them. Could I ask for the list of participants in the meeting?
Certainly, and also I think eventually the global network will have a list of participating institutions, which would be even bigger and better.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. It was nice interacting with you, and I look forward to our continuous collaboration.
Thank you very much, Eden, for your presentation and for being a part of this today.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye. Bye-bye. All right. Dan, I'm looking to you for the roundtable discussion, and I think it's perhaps a good time for all of us to do some introductions. We've had the introductions of the speakers today, but perhaps just to get a little bit of a sense of who's in the room in Toronto. And then I see here on the participants, we have a Mike P. and a Mary Curran and a JB, and then Doug and Dan and myself on the line. So if we can perhaps just do introductions so that we know who's in the group and in the discussion at the moment.
Sure. Do you want to start in Toronto?
Yes, please.
Okay. We'll try to see if the microphone is good enough to pick up everybody's voice with a little bit of a distance.
Okay.
But turn it over to whoever wants to shout first.
Hello?
Can you hear?
No,
Sorry?
we couldn't hear. I couldn't hear.
Okay. I think if there's a way I can walk the computer around. Or, yeah, you guys can come up if you want. Just talking to the computer.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear.
Okay. I'm Joanna Stroh-Kaminska. I'm a Dean of the Social Sciences from University of Parmian Nasura in
Hello, Johanna.
Oh. Irma, hello. This is Lynn Gangone from the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education.
Hi, Lynn. Thank you. And thank you very much for that email that you sent out. It had a wonderful response. We appreciate it.
My name is Ming Lee. I'm the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development at West Michigan University.
Hi. Hi, Ming Lee.
Hi, Irma. It's Lynn.
Hi.
Dean,
Lynn.
Faculty of Education. Hi, University of Hong Kong.
Hi, Lynn.
I'm Ken Wortham. I'm the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development at West College in the U.S.
Sorry, that I could, it was breaking up a little bit.
Name is Janaka.
Hi, Janaka. Hi.
So that covers the folks here. The hands that you did, or you only partially heard. Yeah, you go have them come up and try again to hear who they are.
Okay,
Hello.
thank you. Hi.
Hello. Corey Brown, Rowan University. I'm the Dean of Faculty here in
Hi.
John O'Mara,
Hi, James.
Thunder Bay, Canada.
Hi, I'm
Hello.
Prachi Srivastava, and I'm Prachi Srivastava, and I'm chair of Critical Policy, Equity, and Leadership Studies at the Faculty of Education, University of Western Ontario, Canada.
Hi.
My last but not least, Ralph there. I'm education.
Hello.
That was Ralph Sinclair, University of Victoria. And
Say
that's
again.
us.
Okay. All right. So we're now in the section on the roundtable discussion. Thank you very much, everyone, for the introductions. Can we now perhaps move over to the electronic group? I can perhaps just start with my own introduction. I'm Irma Ilov. I work at the University of Pretoria. I'm a former Dean of Education and also the founder of the Africa Deans of Education Forum in 2013, and called ADEF. And ADEF is a focal point of the teacher task force, of whom we had the Dr. Dubra speak to us earlier in this session. The Africa Deans Forum was founded in order to provide a voice for African Deans of Education on the continent 6 years ago, and we found it to be a very valuable forum. So that's my background. Doug, I don't know if you want to do an introduction.
No, I've already been introduced. Thanks.
Okay, then I see Mary Curran on the line.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, I'm Mary Curran. I'm a faculty member and director of local global partnerships at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. And I'm also the past chair of the AACTE's Internationalization of Teacher Education Topical Action Group.
Hi, Mary. Welcome.
Thank
and
you.
then I see Mike P. on the line.
Mike's microphone is not available on his computer, and so he typed in his introduction. Should I read that to you?
Yes, please.
Okay, he's the chair of the AACTE's Global Diversity Committee and is at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so this section of our program is to talk about the goals and activities of the GNDE. I think you've all have had access to the website with the initial ideas of setting up this network. But the idea of this discussion in our program is to tap into the wisdom of everyone who's in the room, to talk about the possibilities of such a network and how we can articulate the way forward. So it's actually a very open discussion, not with a very set firm agenda for this part of the program anyway. So I'd like to open up the floor with to perhaps ask the question in terms of your own ideas. What are the things when the Global Deans Network are mentioned? What are the things that come up in your mind? What are the questions that you have, and what are the comments that you would like to make?
Irma, how do you want to proceed? Yeah, how do you want to proceed? Do you want people to come up and try to speak into the computer, or do you want us to have a grassroots kind of conversation here, and I'll take notes and report back to you all?
You know what? I wonder if that wouldn't be best if we do that, because the sound quality is not too good. So if we can perhaps, it's now 10 past. If we can, how much time do you think? About 20 minutes discussion time, or 20 to 30 minutes?
Sure. Why don't we take 20 minutes, and I'll take some notes, and I'll reconnect and give you a brief overview of kind of where the conversation is going and hopes and concerns folks had, and we can go from there.
That would be great. Thank you very much, Dan. Let's do that for the Toronto group. And then Mary, I think it's then with audio, it's just you and me and Doug on the line now. I think Dan will probably mute us so that we don't disturb the discussion in Toronto too much. I don't know if you want to continue this discussion online or whether there's perhaps another way in which we can do this. Perhaps join back into the discussion in 20 minutes' time.
For those of us who are online, we could either do it through the chat or we can just say to reconvene in 20 minutes. Either is fine.
Okay, I think Mary, I would actually like, maybe let's do it through the chat. When with chat, do you mean by text, by typing messages?
Right. There's a chat icon
Function,
at the
yes.
bottom left of this
Yeah.
screen, at least that I see. So
Yeah.
with Mike and others who are online, we can do that.
Okay.
And maybe just try to just in terms of process, Irma, just maybe in response to your initial question, what comes to mind immediately in terms of the global network of deans of education, and maybe crystallize that one or two thoughts, and they could be added to the list that Dan will have at the end of the Toronto discussion.
That's a great idea. Okay. Sorry, I'm also starting to feel the effects of a Friday evening on this on this side. So thank you for any creative suggestions. Is a good one at this stage. Okay. So did we now just say we will type it, or do you want us to continue verbally, Doug?
No, I think typing or verbally, either one. Just to try to isolate one or two thoughts that we have and post them, or say them now. Either way.
Okay.
Mary's looks like Mary's typing, so we could do that too. I have just one thought that is relevant to all networks, but I'll just put it down as well.
Okay. Okay, I think we're starting to go towards the end of the 20 minutes. I'm not sure how the discussion is going in Toronto, Dan.
It's Doug. I think I've left the recording on, so we'll have the conversation covered, but I imagine Dan will also have a set of notes, so we'll be able to follow up.
Okay, do you think they might not be coming back online?
I think they may be knowing this group, I think they might be still chatting.
Yes, I think, and maybe it's a good thing if they continue to chat. Yes, I will. I've got nothing else to do, so I'm going to remain online, and then maybe we can see what happens when they get back up.
Yeah, I guess I can't yell loud enough to catch you if you're.
No. No, I think it's more important for the discussion to take place.
Yes,
I think
agree.
it's very valuable.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. No, I'll continue to wait.
Okay. And I'll watch Dan's mic.
Okay, thanks.
Are you guys still there?
Yes, we're still here. Hi.
Irma, Doug?
Yes.
Yes, I'm still here. And Doug also?
And this is Mike. I think I have a microphone now.
Great.
Hi, Mike.
Irma or Doug, are you still there?
Yes.
Yes, we are still here. Can you?
Yes, I got you now. I had my mic muted too. Sorry. We had a really good discussion, and fortunately, we shut it down just as it was getting really interesting. But I'll share some quick notes to try to sum it up. Folks commented on the pace of change internationally, and so much of the drive to fast and furious to make that change, and then cutting corners in the efficiency as a result, and the challenges involved in organizations doing this. We ask questions of ourselves: how do we help these countries build capacity, develop quality over time versus respond to short-term emergencies? How do we resist bypassing the education sector when there's outreach policy makers and government sectors instead? How do we create voice that speaks to these bodies? How do we build a common understanding when the context varies so much? Talk a bit about how we can collaborate and learn from each other and build a common nomenclature. And how do we engage in this conversation up front to help guide it, or be prepared to resist challenges down the line? What is the role of new private providers? How do we speak? Why would people want to listen to us? Ultimately, there's nothing in conversation, and that's frustrating. How do we interrupt that dialogue? And finally, and then also thinking about the importance of governments and their stability and their ability to not be in flux because of chaos and turnover. How do we help institutions, help countries, and institutions in the stabilize? And then finally, perhaps thinking about what our voice would be as an entity or organization. Are there value statements that we can bring to the conversation? Like an educator needs to be a part of all of these conversations. Like that we can't necessarily give you plug and play answers. Or work with you and how to talk about it. Other principles of transparency so that we know when it's PricewaterhouseCoopers making a recommendation and understand that they're coming from a particular context. But that here's a quick summary of the conversations we had with a lot of and energy.
Okay. I couldn't hear a lot of what was said now, Dan, but the fragments that I did catch was I liked a lot. I'm very glad that Doug is recording this, so I will go back to the recordings and hope that the sound quality was better up in the northern hemisphere than it is down south over here. But thank you very much for that feedback. Doug, I'm not sure, could you hear clearly?
I'll type it up.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Okay. Doug, from your side, based on the comments that were just made?
Well, I think maybe just before, just to share, Mary and Mike and Irma and I had a little text message conversation, and I'll include those in the notes as well. I'll take Dan's notes and the verbal comments and put together a kind of a report on this meeting for you to look over, and then maybe the steering committee can look at it and take it into account. And there are several parts of the website and in the initial documents we used for the formation of the network that could be adapted and amended in accordance with this conversation. So maybe that's the output from this session. And I think the discussion, I'm just looking at the postings on the instant message. Well, I think everybody can see them. So I'm actually not going to do that, but we'll put them into the report as well. Rather than repeat them here, we can pick them up and run with them later on.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. Thank you very much for offering to do that, Doug. And then with the notes from Dan, I think it will give a good direction for us. Any more questions or comments from Toronto?
Yes, I think Lynn has something to say. Lynn, do you want to come up? Sorry.
A couple of things. I'm just looking at the notes, and I see that you've got ISET up there. And, yeah, we've been in touch with them as well. As a matter of fact, Irma, that's why I'm going to South Africa.
Wonderful.
To go to that meeting. Also, I think there's been a question about whether or not this group would be, we could facilitate research that we could share. You know, certainly we have a number of research institutions represented here, and the dean from Western Michigan is also on board of an organization we have here in the States called CADRE, which is the Council for Academic of Education Institutions. Ta-da. And so, you know, to the extent that I think he's very interested in seeing how research institutions might be able to interface, which is a different agenda in some ways, but tied in terms of, I would think, everything from best practices to policy research to any number of other ways in which we're thinking about the education. So, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything. I'm just throwing that up there.
No, I think that's an excellent suggestion. There are, and also to learn more about existing initiatives. You know, the whole. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Mesh Guides initiative, which is an international initiative of translating findings from doctoral studies to be accessible for teachers in classrooms around the globe. And that's an initiative that's growing exponentially. And I think it's not the only one. There are many initiatives where research findings are almost activated. And I think that the GNDE can play a very important role in that regard, to bridge the gap between research and what's going on in schools and classrooms. So thank you for that contribution. Yes. Any more comments from Toronto?
I'm wondering if people might be getting tired.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. Okay, so let me as chair then take the cue from that comment. The next steps and the shared vision. If everyone is comfortable, if we can move over to that part of the agenda for today. I'm not sure if Lynn is in the room on that side. Lynn Goodwin.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yes. Then Dan, I perhaps have a suggestion. I think having the benefit of everyone being in the room, if the discussion can continue with everyone present. I am having a little bit of a challenge with the sound quality at the moment. I don't know. It was fine for the first 2 hours, but for some reason I'm losing some of the quality of the conversation. But maybe if the conversation can continue over there in Toronto, and then we can take that back to the next meeting of the steering committee for the next steps and the way forward. Would that be something that would be a good way to finish up this meeting?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, great. Doug, and you?
Just very quickly, a couple of things, very positive things. As we started this meeting, we've had 9 different institutions sign up for the network list. So it's obviously the message is out there. So it's good. So there is obviously an interest within the sector. And also like to share the reaction from, well, you heard Edom from one part of UNESCO, but I had several emails from other parts of UNESCO who definitely wanted to make contact with the network. So UNESCO is a very big organization, and so you'll have many interfaces. And so again, a sign of the that times, and maybe just 2 maybe brief items. In the activities list we put out, we are trying to organize a meeting at the World Education Research Association Forum in Japan for this network. If you can, it's in early August. The dates are on the website. And also, Irma, you had expressed interest from the University of Innsbruck. Do you want to share that?
Yes, the Dean of Education in Innsbruck, which, we all know Innsbruck is in Austria. He heard about this network and he has very gracefully offered to host a meeting for this network sometime next year. So it is something that is in discussion, but Innsbruck was on the trade routes in Europe at the time of building bridges between the different parts of the world. So I think it may be something that we want to consider, is because if we want to keep the momentum, it's important to attach to existing forums and conferences in education. But then also I think within the next year, this group will gather momentum, and we will be articulating a focus and a vision around particular projects. And it may be worth our while to have an in-person meeting where we all get together for 2 or 3 days and discuss the way forward. What would be is this something that you would be open for?
I can ask participants as we're discussing, and I think that might be good to follow up on down the line.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. All right. So thank you very much for the positive